listening to Winnipeg's Classic 107. My name is Simon Rusnak. One graduate studies researcher at the University of Manitoba has been exploring the connection between music education and the potential benefits in academic performance and mental health in high school students. To hear more, I'm joined by Susan Birchall. Hello.
Hello.
Welcome to Winnipeg's Classic 107, Susan.
Thanks for having me.
We're obviously a classical music radio station, and so I think I'm a little bit biased here and certainly very eager. So let's jump right to it, shall we? Based on your research, is there a scientific benefit for grade 12 students in taking music courses?
Absolutely. And I mean, even if there wasn't, music has an intrinsic benefit to students. I'm preaching a little to the choir here, but, and I mean, music courses in high school, they allow students the opportunity to learn and grow as musicians and also explore other facets of their identity aside from core academic courses.
Certainly. And we're going to dive more into your findings shortly. But I know that there's been a lot of studies done on the benefits of classical music on any number of things, from plants growing to cows producing milk to increased productivity and decreased blood pressure in people. What inspired you to look at this particular grade 12 demographic?
Well, I actually started to get more and more interested in the relationship between taking music courses and other academic and mental health outcomes, more so actually during my music degree. So, and as my music degree wrapped up, I was working at the Manitoba Centre for Health Policy, which is where I did my research. And I was realizing all of these really neat opportunities to look at educational outcomes and mental health outcomes in relation to courses that students took. And it's a really underutilized piece of the data at MCHP. So I really wanted to dig in and see what those results were, because there is a lot of research that looks at music and mental wellness in terms of, do you feel better? Do you feel more confident? But I wanted to look specifically at a diagnosis and specifically at like exam marks and did you graduate when you're expected to graduate.
So let's talk a little bit more about then, shall we? Focusing first on academic performance,
okay.
Which saw students taking at least one music course, right? And they scored not only higher on math, but also language arts exams and even being more likely to graduate on time. Is that right?
Yep, that is right.
So take us through a little bit more about your research and how you came across and made this connection.
So that's a very broad question. Is there any piece of it like you had in mind specifically?
Well, no, I'm just kind of curious about, kind of looking more broadly. I'm thinking of, a grade 12 student who might be listening to this conversation and thinking, okay, so I can just sign up for a music course and I'm going to do better in math, language arts, and graduate on time. What was it there that went into, the students themselves, like their student characteristics or maybe their socioeconomic backgrounds or gender or that type of thing?
Okay. So as part of this research, I wanted to make it so that I was comparing apples to apples, right, and not comparing low-income students to higher income students, which we already know that higher income students do better across the board than lower income students. That's just part of the unfortunate reality. So what I tried to do is make all of my students look as similar as possible. So I put everything into an algorithm and said, okay, if all of the students have the same economic background, if they are the same sex, if they were doing the same as each other academically before they even got to high school, and did they have any mental health challenges before they got to high school, is what I looked at. And if all of those things were the same, do music courses help or not? And the answer is still yes.
And how do they help, like in terms of that data? Is it a substantial increase or is it marginal?
Okay, so for looking at, for language arts in particular, there's a really, for language arts in particular, there's a significant increase, or rather, no, let me rephrase that. There's a decrease in the gap between exam scores between high and low income students. So for students who took no music courses, the difference in the average exam score for lower income students and higher income students, there was a 9% difference in the average exam score. But for students who took 6 or more music courses, that gap shrunk to 4%.
Wow. Yeah, that's rather substantial.
Yeah.
What about when it came to math?
For math, there wasn't the same shrinking of the gap, but absolutely music, taking more music courses, the average expected exam score was higher.
That is really fascinating. And I mean, we're talking about the academic side of things, but as you've alluded to, I mean, we've so often heard about the mental wellness aspect of listening to classical music. I mean, we're a classical music radio station, and people tell us all the time, we just leave Classic 107 on the dial because we just feel better listening to it. Can you tell us more about focusing specifically on the mental side of things in terms of the research that you've done here, and what we're seeing in terms of the science backing up that sort of anecdotal claim?
So I looked specifically at a diagnosis because that's the information that we had in the data. We had information on, were you diagnosed with a mental illness or were you not? And there's a little bit of bias there because the data that we have doesn't include, did you go see a psychologist? Did you go talk to your school nurse? Did you go and talk to a trusted friend, and then that provided a little bit more support? So you didn't get to the point of being diagnosed, but you still had those mental health challenges. So we didn't have that kind of information. But in terms of a diagnosis, specifically for something like substance use, students taking 3 or more music courses had a 29% reduced risk of being diagnosed with a substance use disorder.
Wow. I mean, just to be clear, I mean, you're talking about the other steps that, people can take and finally reaching that point of diagnosis, but we're not talking about prevention here, right? We're talking about a sort of correlation between the two, right? Taking a music education course or 3, and then something like struggles with substance abuse, right?
Right. So I couldn't look at any kind of causal relationship because that's not what the data supports. You can just say because it's observational data that's already been collected. It's not part of an experimental study. So we can observe what the data shows, but we can't say we're seeing this because.
Does that sort of beg kind of the next step in terms of continuing this research in music education that you're doing?
Oh, absolutely. Because having the numbers is great, but it doesn't tell the whole story. And in order to tell the whole story, you need to go and talk to people in the community, to students, and say, music and non-music students, and say, how are you doing mentally? What other supports are you leaning on? And how do you feel about the life you're living? And then look at those 2 pieces together.
I'm wondering, as one last question, if we can talk a little bit more broadly about music education. And I mean, this research comes in the shadow of the Scrap Bill 64, which would have brought these sweeping changes to the education system here in the province of Manitoba. How do you think research like this could then be applied to the classroom and directly to students and music educators and parents?
Well, with all the positive results from this study, I think it would be important for students anyway to maintain at least the same level of music education in the province, because it is obviously helping some groups of students. And I mean, if we could expand the music programs and offer, not necessarily offer more classical music programs, because that doesn't click with everyone.
Yeah.
So to offer music courses that students want to take. So things like maybe Indigenous music for those students, or maybe songwriting, or maybe more lean more into jazz if that's what students are more interested in. So just to have a variety of courses that students are interested in be would be one thing that schools and administrators could do. And the other thing would be, because especially for low-income students, there are barriers to even taking music courses in the first place, because you need to rent an instrument, you need to have the time available to practice, and not all students have those resources available. So one thing that I know, it's not within reach of all schools and all school divisions, but to have those resources available to students who need them and who would like to take music courses but are facing barriers. So
yeah, all very important points. And Susan, thank you so much for sharing a little bit more on your research, and looking forward to hearing more. Thank you so much.
oh, you're welcome. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me.